and welcome to today's lecture on Ancient Greek Origin Stories. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we're going back to when it all began, or at least when the ancient Greeks thought it all began, to the time of the Titanic Titans, to the mighty lords of Olympus. And along the way, we're going to find out how the ancient Greeks conceived of the origins of their universe, of their gods, and of mankind itself. But these aren't peaceful stories. These are stories of betrayal, of violence, of murder. So journey with me as we investigate ancient Greek origin stories. When it comes to the origin of the ancient Greek gods, the first question is not what we know, but rather how we know it. And that all begins with the early Greek author Hesiod. Composing his tales around 700 BCE, Hesiod is one of the earliest Greek authors whose texts remain with us today. And his two works provide us with the most complete conception of what the ancient Greeks thought about the origins of the divinities they worshipped. The Theogony tells the tale of the origin of the Greek gods, from their birth out of chaos to their battle for divine supremacy. If the Theogony is about the gods alone, Hesiod's Works and Days focuses on the relationship between the gods and people, highlighting the extreme power of the Olympian gods compared to man's relative weakness. But while we rely heavily on Hesiod's texts to understand how the Greeks perceived their origins, we know little about Hesiod himself. So Hesiod's still really very much a mystery to us. You know, when we say he lived around 700 BCE, that's just a rough guess. And as a matter of fact, we don't actually know how he transmitted these tales. So when we say author, he wasn't necessarily writing. And in fact, most scholars today think he actually probably sung and performed these tales for aristocratic families, much in the same way as a medieval bard would do. One thing we do know is that the Greeks conceived of their origin stories in a far different way than practitioners of Abrahamic religions today. While both focus on gods, they do so in very different ways. Now, practitioners of Christianity or Judaism or Islam today, many of them think that their religion's sacred texts are the Word of God, or at least divinely inspired. But when we think of Hesiod, and we think about the Theogony or the Works of Days, we need to think about these as kind of about the gods, but not the word of the gods themselves. So how did it all begin? According to Hesiod, in the beginning there was chaos, a void, a nothingness, even less than an abyss or a pit, since those need something surrounding it to exist. Out of this chaos was born Gaia, who the Greeks conceived of as Mother Earth. Her siblings, the rest of the first generation of gods, were Nyx, or night, Erebus, or darkness, Tartarus, the underworld abyss, and Eros, love, or desire. Without the help of any male deity, Gaia became pregnant and gave birth to Uranus, also known as Father Sky. Now, despite the fact that Uranus is Gaia's son, they soon mate and produce offspring so hideous they must not see the light of day. So we get Gaia giving a virgin birth to Uranus, then making out with him and having a bunch of monstrous babies, which Uranus then takes and imprisons back in the womb of their mother. This is weird stuff, guys. Weird stuff. What we learn from Gaia and her siblings is that the earliest Greek deities were portrayed as half nature, half person. So Gaia actually is the earth itself, very natural, but can also get pregnant and feel pain, very human. And what this connection between the early Greek gods and nature makes us think is that these early divinities may have evolved from pre-Greek versions of nature gods and goddesses. A goddess of the earth, a god of the sky, a god of the sea, that sort of thing. So who were these hideous beasts? First up, the Hecatoncheires. With 100 hands and 50 heads, the three Hecatoncheires were renowned for their immense strength. Next, the three Cyclopes. Easily identifiable by the single eye in the middle of their head, the Cyclopes were expert craftsmen, eventually creating many of the weapons the Olympian gods became known for. Finally, the 12 Titans, the most human of Gaia and Uranus's offspring. So Uranus at this point is not happy with his hideous children, and he takes the Hecatoncheires and the Cyclopes and imprisons them inside of the earth, inside the womb of their mother Gaia. Gaia, at this point, is understandably upset with her poor offspring being imprisoned against their will, so she plots with the youngest of the Titans, Cronus, to free her children and end Uranus's tyrannical rule. And when Uranus is drunk and trying to make a move on Gaia, Cronus sneaks up with a long sickle, a long staff and blade usually used for harvesting grain. And at the perfect moment, he slices off the phallus of his father Uranus. And afterwards he takes the phallus and he launches it majestically through the heavens, across the skies, through the clouds, landing in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Cyprus. And along the way it's spewing blood, and from this blood we get the giants, and we get the Melii, a branch of like wood nymph. And then from the member itself, as it lands into the sea and starts frothing, we get Aphrodite, the goddess of love. So beautiful Aphrodite is, in fact, the product of a horrendous act of violence and bloodshed. And this story also tells us why she's so often depicted arising from the sea. With Uranus out of the picture, the newly dominant Titans decided they had no intention of sharing power. The Hecatoncheires and Cyclopes remained imprisoned, and Cronus now ruled as king of the gods. Along with his wife and sister, Rhea, he produced many offspring, but a prophecy had foretold that his own son would overthrow him. In an attempt to avoid his fate, Cronus consumed each and every one of his children, eating them whole. But his wife Rhea, like their mother Gaia, was angered at the horrible treatment of the children she worked so hard to bear. For her last child, a young boy by the name of Zeus, she replaced the baby with a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. As Cronus consumed the stone, he was none the wiser. So Cronus obviously didn't learn his lesson from what he did to his own father. And this time it's Rhea, Cronus' sister and wife, plotting with Zeus, their youngest son. And Rhea and Zeus get together and they put a little syrup of ipecac, that stuff that makes you throw up, into the wine of Cronus. And as Cronus is drinking his wine, he starts feeling bad, and eventually he starts vomiting up the wine, and then vomiting up all the Olympian gods, all the brothers and sisters of Zeus. The Titans, however, were not to give up their power so easily. A massive battle ensued, with the Greeks called the Titanomachy, which pitted the newly freed Olympian gods against their previous generation of Titans. But in this battle, the Olympians used their minds as much as their strength. They freed the Hecatoncheires and the Cyclopes. The latter crafted weapons: Zeus's lightning bolt, Poseidon's trident, Hades' cap of invisibility, while the former rained down boulders upon the helpless Titans. And so, with the weapons of the Cyclopes and the sheer strength and boulders of the Hecatoncheires, the Olympian gods are able to defeat the Titans. And at that point, Zeus himself becomes the ruler of the Greek gods of Olympus. The Titans lived on, but were far less powerful than before. And one of their second generation, a Titan by the name of Prometheus, was the first to create mankind.
molding him out of clay. But man has always been weak and slow compared to the beasts of the world, and so Prometheus gave man fire as a tool to survive and thrive.
Now Zeus is none too happy about the fact that Prometheus has just gone off without any approval and given mankind fire. And so he chains up Prometheus to a rock, binds him to this rock, and every day an eagle, the animal of Zeus, comes and he eats the liver of Prometheus, and every night that liver grows back. A pretty brutal punishment simply for helping out mankind.
The creation of woman, on the other hand, was ordered by Zeus, ironically, as an explicit way to make man miserable. I kid you not. This woman, who went by the name of Pandora, was so beloved by the gods that they all gave her gifts, hence the name Pandora, all gifts. They also gave her a box, really like a very large storage jar, what in Greek we would call a pithos, with the explicit command not to open it.
And from this box, or this pithos, right, all the evils of the world emerge. So we have pestilence and plague, we have greed and vice, all emerging from this jar. But there's one thing that's left in the end, and that one thing, of course, is hope. Now, I personally don't really get why it's hope that's left in there. You think you'd want hope actually out in the world helping people? But hey, I didn't write these stories. So what we learn from the stories of the origin of the Greek gods? Well, we learn that early on especially, these gods and divinities end up being kind of half person, half nature, a very close connection to nature. We also learn that the gods are powerful, but certainly not infallible. And last, and perhaps most importantly, we learn that you should definitely worship the gods, but certainly don't act like the gods. Just a few lessons we can take away from ancient Greek origin stories.